All right, here we go. So we're recording these sessions and they're available afterwards on the SOL website. This is also where you can see upcoming monthly themes and weekly guests. So please share widely with your networks. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, just let us know and we can add it in. Try to anyway, sneak it in. Now, before I introduce our special guest, I would like to acknowledge where I'm coming from. I'm here in High River, Alberta, hitting buttons I shouldn't be hitting. The traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the First Peoples of Southern Alberta, including the Siksika, Piikani, Kiani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, as well as the Métis Nations of Alberta Region 3. Now, as I said before, our guest today is Eliese Watson. And a little bit about Eliese. She's the founder and master beekeeper of ABC Bees. And since founding the ABC Bees in 2010, I took this off the website, which is also an awesome website, by the way. Check it out if you are looking at getting bees. Since founding it in 2010, it has become the leading beekeeping education company in Canada. Over her career, Eliese has taught beekeeping across North America, been featured in Forbes magazine, and represented small-scale beekeepers at the Canadian Senate. Eliese has developed strong beginner, intermediate, and advanced beekeeping programs that they've been shared to thousands of students. She also teaches small-scale apiary production in a 5-week course online to other farmers, hobbyists, and enthusiasts from around the world through the Level 1 beekeeping course. Today, Eliese is here to talk to us about urban beekeeping, the realities and livestock management in the city, which I'm going to take lots of notes about because this year's edition was chickens and next year I'm hoping to add bees. So I'm going to take lots of notes and ask some questions. So without further ado, welcome Eliese and take it away.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you to all of you who are attending today and as well as watching this recording down the road. I'm so grateful to be a part of SOL and the speaker series that's happened throughout this year. And I really do believe that ecological and holistic land care is a very important part of earth repair. And I think that's where a lot of us are coming into engaging with SOL or other organizations like my company and other education is this massive transition culturally that we're seeing of people getting what they want from transitioning into being responsible for what they have, whether it's being responsible for the types of clothes they wear, the way they consume things, to distilling it even more to like how they're producing the things that they're consuming. And here as the creator and owner operator and team leader and master beekeeper at ABC Bees, that's where we started 14 years ago, is really trying to figure out like how do we be a part of earth repair and stewards of our environment while also like having an awesome time farming. And so my background, I grew up in rural Alberta. So me and Nick are not too far apart on the landscape here in Canada and North America. And what rural prairie living looks like is a lot of large scale production of food, whether it's cereals, whether it's, rapeseed oil or, sunflowers and corn, to massive cattle production. And so for me, having pulled calves in February, helped with, combining in the fall, the idea of shoveling poop or needing a large amount of space and managing livestock in the winter was not actually that desirable. I'm not super handy. I was never really given the opportunity as a child to learn the skills of like fixing a frozen watering vessel in a field. It's something my dad and my brothers did, and I would go out and I would just kind of hold the tools. So with that, I have a strong interest in learning those things, and I am learning them, year by year as a beekeeper and being out in nature and farming and being around really great people like you'll meet through SOL. It became really desirous for me, like when I'm going to be working farming, I don't want to smell like poop. And I also don't want to be out digging out animals in the wintertime. And the funny thing is beekeeping has always been a livestock that's been managed by when it comes to hierarchy of society, it was like the priest of the church, the high convent in the community. It's always been the academics, because it's not digging out feces. It is, managing the bees. You always smell good after doing it. You don't have to wear special outfits to do it unless it's protective clothing. And then you harvest honey, which is worth more than sugar. You can harvest wax, which is the only thing that think about before petroleum product that you could light and give off the highest frequencies of light to see by compared to tallow or fat. And then you also had the benefit of the alcohol production, which was of course like really ideal in the cold winter months of having really good lighting and really good alcohol. I mean, we all know that a big part of enjoying farming is the wintertime blues in January, February, and popping open that, freshly canned thing of pickles that smell like dill in summertime. There's nothing better than homemade beverages too, whether it's like elderberry wine or whatever it is you're producing. So now that we have huge amounts of urbanization, even in Canada, it's pretty impressive considering the demographic of the country. A huge urbanization continues to flow. And a lot of people are coming from either first or second generation farming, maybe one or two generations away from the farm. And there is this like emptiness that I'm seeing in people. They're like, well, I came to the city. We'd always visit my grandmother or grandfather on their farm. And now that I have my own place and there's a part of me that's missing that wants to reconnect. And I feel like that's a very much a Canadian story and a North American story, as well as that whole being responsible for what you have. So today I was asked to talk really about urban beekeeping realities and livestock management in the city. What I want to touch on today are basically 4 specific things. One is kind of what I've been talking about, the idea of urban farming and bees in particular, talking about livestock in the city, specifically when it comes to bylaw and regulations, and also how to navigate those kind of avenues in a very glossy way. I mean, we only have a short period of time this afternoon. And then we're going to talk about the 4th thing is about considerations of safety in urban production. Because it's really important that we're considerate of others when we choose to live in a high density environment. Even if you're lucky to have a quarter acre in an urban space, there still is a lot of compassion that needs to be had for your neighbors. And then 4th, and of course the most fun is actually figuring out how is there a market? Can you make profit? Can you sell? What can you do with these byproducts in order to generate income, whether it's covering the expense of keeping the livestock or potentially adding it as a value add product to maybe some other things that you're already doing in your homespun, small plot, intensive plan. So those are the 4 things I'm going to cover today. Now, do any of you, before we get started, have any specific questions that you might like me to touch on? And you can put it in the chat if you're more comfortable there, or you can turn on your microphones and just blurt out stuff. I'm more than welcoming everyone to share. Okay, Charlene's connecting to audio, which makes me hopeful that nope, she muted herself. Okay, sorry to call you out, Charlene. Okay, so to start off with urban farming. So the concept of urban farming, it depends on the municipality you live in. It can actually be very taboo. So when you talk about the idea of producing your own food, so for instance, a good friend of mine, Ron Finley, he's South Central LA, he's the gangster gardener, TED Talk, you can find him, he's awesome. For him, he took up that boulevard space in between the sidewalk and the street, and he is growing bananas, papayas, sweet potatoes. I mean, this is Los Angeles. And he actually was like told he was going to be arrested for growing things on public property. He ended up going to court and winning that court date in order to grow food. And he said he was feeding the neighborhood because people in South Central at the time, especially, it's gentrified a lot in the last decade. Access to healthy foods was not really available in a walking distance in the community he lived in. So this idea of growing food can be actually against the rules in where you live. And I mean, we can talk about the politics of all of that aside, but I think it's something to be conscientious in the back of your head of when you're approaching this concept of food production and self-sufficiency in an urban space, whether it's livestock or agricultural focused for food production. I think you have to be aware that this is a conversation that people may not be fully familiar with, and that you may be the first point of contact that you have with these people, these individuals, neighbors, people on transit, whatever, about this conversation, so that you recognize that your voice may be the only voice they've ever heard. And so being compassionate, a good listener, asking them questions before kind of unleashing your passion on someone. And I say that as someone who it can and does on the regular overwhelm people all the time, because me and bees are like this. And so it's a really good way to create yourself as this gateway opportunity for people to talk about this, because a lot of times people think that the farming belongs in the country, people in urban green spaces, lawns, manicured, no dandelions, belong in a city, because that's where the dog runs and that's where they want to have their picnic, and they don't want to have bugs, specifically bees, around potentially stinging them and attacking them at their picnic. So urban farming, even though in our kind of bubble, and remember, it's a bubble, the bubble's growing, but it's a bubble, it's like a no problem. Of course, you know what a CSA is. Of course, you know what small plot intensive farming is. Of course, you know the difference between organic and inorganic additives in soil. Of course, you know about pesticides and their detrimental impact on the ecosystem. But that's in our bubble, and we talk to each other a lot. And outside that bubble, maybe your municipality, maybe people that have a position of power. And so being really empathetic and asking them questions and finding out where they're at before you start downloading on them is key. Now, shifting into municipal regulations when it comes to livestock, specifically bees and chickens is the most dominant ones, but there are now like some sort of inclusionary factors in some regions of ungulates. So like hooved animals, or sorry, ruminants. So you can like goats, sheep, like, you know, like, and I'm just like so excited to hear this, but it's usually like the random place, like in the outskirts of Boston, like Leominster, Massachusetts. It's like, yeah, there's a goat walking down the street, and you're like, what? It's just like, yeah, we're cool like that. And you're like, oh, okay. Weirdest city I've ever been in my life. But I think
there's a goat that lives down by our place, actually. There's
totally right.
Two goats, yeah. Awesome.
Well, the city of Edmonton, there was a guy there who had a farm, and the city encroached on the farm, and the family's on the farm for like 4 generations. And it's just like it's a farm. It's like a larger lot in the city. And he had a sheep and a goat, and he's had it there for like ever. And then the goat got loose, and he found it like 3 blocks away, and someone called bylaw. And the nice thing is the city gave him a special permit. So he's the only one in the city of Edmonton that has a special agricultural permit. And they actually zoned his property agriculture in order to make it a legal bylaw. It was so sweet when people do that, but that's not a very common thing.
Not the norm, unfortunately, no.
No. And so when it comes to bees and chickens, which tend to be this comprehensive bylaw, tends to be kind of pushed through with birds and bees, it's really important that you look at your municipal considerations. The thing is that for a long time, honeybees weren't considered livestock under provincial and federal law. So all bylaws, specifically in Calgary, would say that you could not maintain livestock in the city limits. But bees were legal by omission because bees were not identified as livestock. Now, the Canadian Honey Council and beekeepers advocated to having the bees recognized as livestock, because the producers that maintain those bees, by getting that recognition, were then better able to access insurance, things that are available to livestock like cows and chickens and other forms of animal livestock. Then the bees came under that umbrella, which then kind of the legal by omission thing no longer was permitted. Livestock then also include honeybees in Canada. So I think it's important to kind of put your feelers out and see what a local bee club is doing if there is a ban on beekeeping. Now, bylaws are only ever as strong as those who enforce it. So I think a big thing when you're talking about keeping livestock in an urban space is that transparency is very important. The instinct to have taller fences and to be secretive about your livestock management is a very bad idea. In the short term, it allows for you to feel this sense of security and like being innocuous with your noisy chickens and you with a smoker in a moon suit in your backyard. Like, I mean, if your neighbor sees smoke coming out of your backyard 2 o'clock on a Tuesday and they don't know you're home, they might be a good neighbor and either come in your backyard to check it out or call the fire department, right? Like that would be a good neighborly thing to do. But that's going to cause a lot of problems for you and a lot of problems for the neighbor. And I think too is the idea of secrecy when it comes to people being insecure or not knowing, like when I first touched on about this idea of food production in urban space, is really being missing an opportunity for inclusion, but also missing an opportunity for change. And so when it comes to beekeeping in an urban space or having chickens in an urban space or any sort of animals that you're keeping in an urban space, whether it's rabbits, maybe you have like your own little ant farm in the back, or you're doing crickets or worms that you're doing to sell. Yeah, I mean, I know people doing all kinds of fun stuff in an urban space, is that it's really important that you alert your neighbors of what you're doing in a really proactive, fun way. So if you have any certifications of any kind or trainings that you did, you can, I've had like little business cards or like postcards made with like, hey, I'm a beekeeper, like, yeah, and like a picture of me and then like my number on the back, and then like a bullet point answers to questions like, I have registered with the province, I have taken courses, I'm super knowledgeable, I want to open it up for a couple days a year. We're going to have a barbecue and I'm going to invite some neighbors over. If you were interested in beekeeping with me, let me know. Here's my link to Facebook or Instagram or my phone number. And this is my address. Like, I'm just 2 houses down. And I think what that does is A, you do it before you start. And B, after you hand those out, wait a couple days and then do some door knocking and actually approach people. Rule number 1, always bring a gift. Okay. So a friend of mine did her master's degree at University of Guelph. And one of her pilot projects was that sociology degree is her and her roommate would walk down the streets of a neighborhood. And if they saw a house lit up on the main street, like in the front window, and a family looked like they were cooking dinner or eating, they would knock, dressed really nicely. They'd knock on the door and they would say, we're here for dinner. And then she would wait, and until she crossed the threshold, she wouldn't tell them about the research. And like, without having a gift or anything, just standing there, less than 15% of people would go, yeah, sure, you can join us for dinner. Everyone else was like, yeah, you're weird, get out of here. Fast forward, she did the same research, same activity with her roommate, but she carried a casserole and the roommate held a bottle of sparkling apple juice. And they knocked on doors. Over 85% acceptance rate for being entering into people's houses as a total cold call stranger. Okay, because people are like, okay. And then as soon as she crossed the threshold, she like pulled out, like, I am working in the university. This is the research I'm doing. This is the sociology, blah, blah, blah. She's a great icebreaker. Because then after that, they're like, interesting, come in. Like, now I know something about you and I'm not afraid. But like, that is huge. Is reciprocity is a huge part, especially in today's society. People are living in a lot of fear about everything. The world is a terrifying place. And so I think it's really important that we recognize reciprocity is a big part of relationship forming, is the idea that I value your time and I value you as a person, and here's a gift that I want to provide you. So for beekeepers, I always recommend, like, go to the local farmer's market, get a bucket of honey, go to the store, dollar store, whatever, buy some cute little jars, put the honey in the jars, and you could just give them honey. And you don't say like, this is my honey. You're like, I'm going to start producing this honey. This is honey from another beekeeper locally that I know or met or know of. And you can start the conversation of bees. Maybe you get a couple of different types of honey so you can flavor taste them and try. And you can do this all on their front porch. And you start this dialogue, but it's really key that you're not like, I'm going to keep bees here. You start the dialogue of like, have you heard of urban beekeeping? What do you know? And I always recommend that in your brain, you have 5 questions that you want to ask before you start telling them what you're doing. Like, have you ever been beekeeping before? Do you know anyone that's a beekeeper? Because it allows for people to feel like they're heard before you're just like verbal diarrhea in their space on their front step. The number 2 things, so present, okay, question asking, so short fences. The 3rd thing that I really like to do when I'm having this dialogue is recognizing that I need to do the work to have a backup location in place. So what I commonly do is I say, the bees are coming, we're installing them on this weekend. I know you might not be comfortable knowing if the bees are going to be a nuisance to you or your safety. So if they're coming, say on May 1st, what if I come over here on June 1st and we talk? If you decide that you're like, you know what, honestly, I'm terrified. I get in the backyard and I don't know if they're bees or wasps. I'm afraid. I don't like having them in the neighborhood. You are accountable and you say, no problem. I have a backup location. If June 1st, they say this isn't going to work, you move them, because that's being a good neighbor. If you don't want to be a good neighbor, you should move to a farm. And I strongly believe this is that if you're choosing to have all the amenities of urban living, of like transit, bike lanes, good walkable bar locations, parks, frisbee golf, like all these amenities of urban living, there's going to have to be some give and take. You can't just take and expect everyone to give. So I have never, ever had to move bees before in this method. And I've kept bees like here where I'm at my husband's restaurant. He has a fine dining restaurant here in the city of Calgary that he's the chef of. We have bees here and people have weddings all the time around these beehives and they know that they're there, and we have cute little signs, but we make them known. We've never had vandalism. The neighborhoods, we've never had complaints. I've never had bylaw in 14 years complain on my bees, because people feel like they're their bees too, because I've welcomed them into the story versus it being my story that they have to be shocked by or don't even know exist and feel let down that they didn't know. So those are the three things. But the third one is a backup location. And I mean, for chickens, for ants, for compost, like you should always have a friend. But there is a rule of thumb with bees. It's 3 feet or 5 feet or 5 kilometers. So your bees do orientation flights. They fly up to 5 kilometers radius, the way a bird flies or a bee flies, from your backyard. So that backup location can't be down the street. It has to be 5 kilometers. So do a Google map, do 5 kilometers, do a circle. It has to exceed that distance, or else you'll move the beehive. The bees will go foraging, see a tree that they recognize and reorient back to the old hive location. You'll have a big beard of bees hanging where your hive used to sit. You'll have a lot of disoriented bees. So your backup location has to be farther away. But I think it's really important that you build those relationships, because when your bees swarm, which they will, I mean, it's a natural life cycle. It's like mitosis of 2 cells. The mitochondria separates in each colony, or each cell has a mitochondria. Each colony is going to have a queen. The reproduction of a superorganism is to issue a full colony, a full superorganism. So swarms happen. But what's great is if everyone knows you're the beekeeper, even if they're not your swarms, they're all going to call you the local neighborhood beekeeper, and you get free bees. And like a strong swarm, to buy it's like almost $400. So to get free bees is like someone being like, hey, so I'm digging out all these Japanese peonies and there's 150 varieties of this house I bought that I don't want to garden. Would you like to have these? And you're like, let's make thousands of dollars in plants. Yes, I will come and dig them out and I will bring all my friends, right? Like we all know these people are like, I have this crazy stone that I don't like. And you're like, you're giving that away? Yes. Yeah. Yes, 1,000 times yes. So I think it's really important that we open those, keep those floodways open. Now, we've covered urban farming, this theoretical idea of urban farming, and our weird bubble that our super cool bubble that we all live in. The idea of food, livestock in the city, and the importance of inclusion. I think it's really key. Inclusion is very important. That's how you end up living in the coolest neighborhood in the city, right? Now, the third thing I wanted to cover was safety in urban production. So safety. So for instance, I have a friend who has a place down here and their property is right up against a public park and a river pathway. And their backyard is very small. And she's like, can you put bees here? And can you like help me do it? And I was like, no. And she's like, why not? And I said, well, this is a really inclusive space. And what I'm noticing at this moment is I see a whole bunch of people from India doing their nightly walks after dinner along this pathway. And I also see a whole bunch of people doing Tai Chi, just like within a stone's throw of your backyard that doesn't have a fence. And I'm seeing all these people from different cultures around the world using this space. It is very white European to not be afraid of honeybees. European honeybees are docile. There are 7 distinct species of honeybee European honeybees are the only ones that are not dangerous. Okay. The other 6, if you're keeping Apis laparosa, Apis dorsata, and you're in northern India, you will probably know somebody who died from being attacked by bees. Okay.
Wow.
If you're from Africa, North Africa, Central South Africa, there's a Cape honeybee subspecies. There's Apis mellifera scolata, which is a subspecies of Apis mellifera. These are Africanized honeybees. They move with the monsoon. And when we go through periods of drought, they're extremely aggressive. And so it's very important when you're looking at inclusive spaces. And it's also important when neighbors are like, I'm not feeling safe with you having bees. And they may say, like, I'm allergic. And it's not up to you to be like, oh, are you really allergic? Well, I don't believe you, because allergies are less than 1% of the population when it comes to honeybees. You're more likely to be allergic to eggs than bees. Yeah, probably. But how short is a Canadian summer? Do you really want to be responsible for someone not enjoying their patio or their summer because they are afraid? And worse, do you want to like come home and see an ambulance in your neighbor's yard and not know, like, did I just like kill them?
Right. Yeah. Considerations.
Yeah. And so I think it's key, like those safety is really important, and perceived safety. So having a fence is good. Having a sign up at the bees saying live bees work here. I like having those things. It's usually a precursor of keeping vandals off your property, because they're like, oh, where are the bees? You're like, yeah, you don't know, don't enter my property if you don't feel safe. And you weren't invited anyway, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that perceived safety and the actual safety of people. And remembering it's a very European, white-centric, North American thing to think that honeybees are a normal part of a farm environment. It's not that way everywhere else in the world. Southeast Asia, Asia, Africa, parts of Eastern Europe, honeybees are kept at a distance from urban dwellings for safety reasons. So I think when we think about urban production, when we think about keeping bees in an urban space, I think the number one advice I can give you is don't be an asshole. Just to put it plainly, is I know that we all have these really strong opinions of what we think an urban space should look like, what we think. I mean, we talk all the time. My daughter will see, another cleared hillside for an urban development. She goes, why did they do that? Didn't they know that the foxes lived there? And she goes on this whole tirade, she's 7, about the importance of an ecosystem. And I have to have real conversations with her about how I don't understand, but that's not how. The problem is not that people want to live here. The problem is the systems that we have on what we think living in a space looks like. Plastic, asphalt, wood chips and lawn. This idea is very, I think, antiquated in a modern sense, and not antiquated enough in a historical sense. And so I think when we're talking about this idea of ecological and holistic land care, I think in my mind, I always think of the word earth repair. And human beings are indelibly tied to the earth. We need the water, we need the food, we need the air. And I think in order to repair those things, we need to repair those interpersonal relationships. And really, I'm just mirroring a beehive. A single bee cannot maintain a colony. We need thousands of bees to maintain a colony. We have one matriarch laying all the eggs, but she's not even the decision maker. The holistic commune of a colony is a decision maker. They make decisions through pheromone communication collectively on reproduction, on expansion, on where they're getting their food from. And so I feel like it's very important that we create that hive mentality, at least if we can in our families, and if even greater if we can in our neighborhoods, because this is how we're going to actually shift bylaw, shift municipal land use regulations, shift the use of herbicides or pesticides in our urban landscape, contemplate the use of roadways to increase the amount of pedestrian space, like really creating an inclusive space for people to actually explore and be a part of the landscape versus observers and passive participants in the landscape. But it's a big responsibility. But having shorter fences, friendly neighbors, and sharing in productivity is going to be your best bet. And so when we have bees that do sting and allergies that are real and safety issues that need to be considered, by being open and conversational about these topics, I think is going to be the best case. Now, last but not least, I know we're running close on time and I want a Q&A if you guys have questions, is sideline hustle. Okay. There is good money in honey. So for instance, it's an expensive thing to get into, but I mean, I just bought 2 cherry trees this year and I think I spent almost $500 on them because they were like these grafted varieties from this guy in Manitoba, and I had them shipped and it was like this whole thing. I'm so excited. There's no fruit on them this year. I'm just watering them and like babying them. Yeah. Just like starting beekeeping, you're going to buy the equipment, you're going to buy the bees, and you're going to like figure out how to keep your smoker lit. You're going to have no idea where the zippers are in your suit, and then let alone finding a single queen amongst 50,000 individuals. It's tough. And I mean, that's why my company exists, is to train people to being good stewards and beekeepers, not bee havers, right? Well, once you do that initial investment and you're maintaining your bees and taking care of them, the ability to sell and use the byproducts of a beehive is extremely profitable and can be. And that's why the church maintained it. I mean, even how many countries would pay tithe or whatever, pay their taxes to the Roman Empire was in beeswax and in honey. So there is a lot of asset that comes out of a hive, not just the honey and not just the wax, but you do have propolis production, which is medicine. It's gathered, it's the gilead off of buds of cottonwood trees. It's resins off of conifers and deciduous trees. And they use it to be this super immune system of the superorganisms. The individual bees have a kind of weaker, not so efficient immune system because as a superorganism, they have a combined immunosuppressive system of fungals and bacteria. And they use that through harvesting resins from the trees, which you as a beekeeper can harvest that. And it doesn't harm the bees. You just put in a weird little kind of plastic tray. The bees don't like the space. They gum the whole wax tray with this. You peel it off the hive, you put it in the freezer, and then you just bang it out on the counter, and then it just shatters full of resin. And then you can grind it up in a coffee grinder, frozen. Don't do it cold or it just gums everything. And then you can put it in tinctures, add it to creams. It's a natural antibacterial, antifungal. It's a full antimicrobial. It's amazing. But the other product that's really beneficial is you can actually trap pollen. And urban pollen is super diverse from, like I said, the Japanese peonies to the poppies that someone's growing. And maybe you might have some tropicals or non-native plants that people are growing in the community garden spaces or on their irrigated landscape of their yards. And this can produce a really unique and remarkable pollen product that you can consume, which bee pollen has all the B vitamins, which is pretty funny. But it allows for you to increase and incorporate whole foods into your diet, especially in the dark days of winter. But also being able to create unique products that you can maybe sell or share or trade within your community in order to maybe get access to dairy or things. Now, the nice thing is that in Canada, the honey has now been deregulated. So you, in your region, in your province, for you to make honey, jar it, and sell it, you don't have to have it inspected by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Even though it has to be CFIA regulated to sell interprovincially or out of country, because it is a food grade commodity similar to eggs and dairy, because it's a natural preservative and there are no known diseases that are spread through it, spoiling or anything like that, they deregulated the CFIA requirement for internal retail sales. So that means if you meet farm gate requirements for labeling, so just look at your local farmers market regulations, you'll see they'll have an area for honey for volume, labels. They want your name. Basically, they want your name, your phone number, and your address. Always have a PO box. Never put your home address. People are weird. Don't ever give your home address. PO boxes are cheap. Get a PO box, your email, and then put the date on it when it was harvested, which is of course super charming for marketing. And I harvested, this is spring honey. So this was harvested in June of 2022. And then this one was harvested in August of 2022. See the color difference because the floral is different. Then you just do that. And it doesn't have to be bilingual unless you're in Quebec or Ontario. Sometimes those rules of farmers market rules are different. And you just follow that criteria, and you can sell it through local coffee shops. You can sell it through local grocery stores. And like my husband, he buys only local ingredients for his restaurant here. It's a totally farm to table restaurant. And so you can always find restaurants that will buy large volumes, not at wholesale prices. My husband's buying honey here for the restaurant at $14 a pound. Okay, like that's, my colonies on average produce 110 pounds of honey per colony. That's a lot of revenue generated. And I just like, don't tell the tax man, but I get paid in cash, and that's our vacation money in the winter. When I like get stir crazy, I'm like, we're going to Mexico. I like pull out my box full of just stash cash. And I'm just like, here, we're going to Mexico. If we don't go to Mexico, we're going somewhere else because I'm going to lose my mind. It is February and I can't start my seeds yet because I'm not quite ready for that. And I can't be beekeeping and it's been too long. Get me out of here.
Yeah.
And that's my honey money. Some years we don't go to Mexico. Some years we just make it to maybe, the coast in Vancouver because I wasn't a good year for production. And some years it's a crazy good year for production. I'm like, and you're coming to Mexico and you're coming to Mexico. Right. And so, and then I like that. Like, I like that there's this idea that we can be producing food in our backyards and we can be producing surplus for our families. Maybe you don't go to Mexico. Maybe you just buy like that really great solar panel array that you were really dreaming about, looking at your Mother Earth's new subscription. And you're just like, oh man, if only I had, that's where you can go with bees. There's honestly very little competition in the market for local retailed honey. Even if everyone's producing honey, everyone sucks at selling it. So, and everyone's friends will always buy honey from them. So That's pretty much it. I'm just glossing over key things when it comes to urban beekeeping realities and livestock management in the city. And I guess we only have a few more minutes, 5 minutes before the timeline of the day is set.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, there's only a few people here. So if anyone wants to ask a question, just unmute themselves, or you can write it in the chat still. Yeah. I have a question, sort of. You made me think of it. What do you have any of like a no-go, like if you live in this type of, like you were saying about the one lady that you were talking to, that you're like, this is not a good place for bees. Like is there anything that you were looking for, like you'd say like this is a bad spot for bees?
I think it's only a bad spot for bees culturally.
Okay.
I don't think there's ever an ecosystem that bees won't survive.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know every ecosystem is ideal for honeybees to thrive. There's a difference, right? So, for instance, in rural areas, there are a lot of barriers to success, especially with an over-concentration of bees in a certain region. So maybe you're a hobbyist, maybe you have 10 acres and you're going to put 3 colonies, but you don't realize that a kilometer away is the biggest beekeeping operation in your province, happens to have a yard there and they maintain 60 to 70 colonies. An ecosystem can only support a certain weight of foragers. Like there's only a certain amount of nectar being produced in a day in an ecosystem. And especially when it comes to monocrops, what ends up happening is as you increase that volume, say it's 100 liters, 100 liters of nectar, but you have, 50 hives, 100 liters divided by 50 versus 20 hives, 100 liters divided by 20. You're going to have much more productivity out of the 20 colonies than you would out of 50 if they're all competing for resources. Right. So I think for me, those things are things you learn by getting bees in the area and kind of piloting it, because you never really know what that threshold is. And the threshold changes annually. If it's a drought year, if it's a rainy year, if it's a hot year, if it's a cold year, you don't really know.
So it's not a big deal if your neighbors already have bees. It would be too close to have, because if you share a fence line,
No. No, I think the question is you just check your neighbor, like, I'm gonna get bees too, and you guys probably high five over the fence, it out, right? Which is great, but I think it's like before you go, okay, how much honey did you produce last year? And if they say I produced 100 pounds, you go, great, I'm gonna put bees here. And if you both the following year produce 100 pounds or 80 pounds or something rational, near, great. But if you put a hive in, and then all of a sudden he drops to 50 and you only produce 50. And then the following year they produce 50 and you only produce 50. Then you start to wonder like, oh, am I living in like a super trendy part of the city where everyone in the neighborhood has
It's bees.
bees? So like this neighborhood where I'm at right now in Calgary, it's one of those neighborhoods. I've kept bees here for over a decade and I've seen honey production slip slowly
Oh,
through
yeah.
time. And I look, I'm like, everyone's got great gardens. There's a lot of foot traffic, a lot of pathways, mature trees, and the community garden here is off the hook. So people are really engaged in that. We have a pilot project for biodiversity in urban spaces for plant and pollinator habitat going in. So there's clearly advocates in the community advocating for pollinators already. I'm like, oh, I bet you it's probably a pretty high density of beehives in this region, but there's no one tracking it.
Right. Right.
So maybe if that's the case, like maybe expect less and be happy with less, or move them.
They move them. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure you have a friend up the hill who would happily have you keep your bees in their yard and they get the fruits of your labor of not only your time, but also some honey share at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm happy, or I think I'm lucky in my neighborhood that my neighbors are fairly savvy to that. A lot of them were all right with the chickens. So we'll see. But I like your idea of going around and talking to the neighbors beforehand, because I can keep the larger animals in, but I can't keep bees in my yard. So
No.
so
And I
to talk
think,
to them like that that's good advice.
I mean, you already have eggs, right? So bring a dozen eggs over.
We're getting there. Yeah.
But whenever you do get eggs,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes those hens can be a pain in the butt and they just like the food and like the environment and they don't really offer anything in return. You're like, you owe me rent.
Yes, that is where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But
Yeah.
no, that's awesome. I'm trying to think of. I've written questions down and then you've answered them already. So
Oh, good. I think the
I'm
key
good.
thing is always, I think we'll all resonate with this, is keeping it local. So if you're buying bees, try and find someone locally. I mean, you can import from New Zealand and get packages. I mean, I'm not a snob. If you told me that your dog was a rescue dog from like some sort of Arctic space, I'd be like, that's great. And if you told me that your dog came from this special breeder that you waited 12 years to get your hands on this dog because it's specific, whatever, nerd out,
Yeah.
great. Like, I'm not going to judge you for that. And all bees deserve to be tended with care and consideration and respect. And so where you get them from, it doesn't matter. But I think it's more important that you're considerate of if you're buying woodenware, if you're buying your suits, is there a local organization or club or group that, or someone in their shop or their shed building stuff, and that could you spend instead of $300 in a large scale major like Walmart version of bee equipment, or are you buying it from like Jim, the retired carpenter down the road who happens to be also a nerd about bees that you met through the local bee club? Give Jim money, man.
Right.
He'll
Yeah.
also come over and help you install your bees and also drink a beer with you and also tell you what you're doing wrong and give you some advice. And those relationships are the ones that make the beekeeping the most enjoyable, is having a community to learn with. And then last but not least, I just want to encourage you guys to take educational training and workshops, whether it's through your local club, whether you come to us at ABCBs, because it's really getting your foot up. And we all know that, like gardening, the best gardeners have always killed more plants than they've kept alive because they've learned through their mistakes. That's really charming and all, but that's really exhausting and hard on your heart if you're constantly trying new things and recreating the wheel all along. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of people who've been doing this for a very long time, longer than I've been alive, that are in these clubs and organizations and groups. They are white, misogynistic men. So if you're not comfortable in that environment, be aware that it is an agricultural background thing, and it tends to be it can be toxic at times in these clubs. So enter with maybe a little more caution if you're an open-hearted person, and be prepared to be told you're wrong and that you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing. It's kind of like the grumpy old man. Just bring a baggie full of cookies and make sure their blood sugar is okay before you start talking to them. I'm not even joking. I do it all the time. Again, giving is huge. And also don't expect people to mentor you. Don't go in, like I said, reciprocity. A lot of people are entering in the world of beekeeping. They go to these club meetings and they're like, Give me all your knowledge for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question. Can you answer all my questions? And I'm going to walk away and not thank you or acknowledge you or appreciate anything you gave me. I'm just going to be like, this made me feel good because I'm so like in my like bubble of learning that I'm not acknowledging the elders and the people who are the knowledge keepers in this industry that are providing this information to me for free. So maybe reciprocity is a thing where if you're like wanting something from a beekeeper, like if you're approaching me and you're like, hey, Eliese, I have some questions. I go, yeah, Nick, how can I help you? And you were like, first of all, I want to say, I would like to help you in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if you need help ever, but I'm here. One of the things I did is I noticed that you have JPEGs of your logo on your website, but they're not in ESP format. And I feel like I could do a high resolution and I have that skill set. What? Yeah, sure. Thanks. I could send you my JPEG. Right. Thank you. Yeah. What do you want to know? I will give you my time now. I feel like you respect and appreciate me, you know, a little bit about who I am and what I'm interested in. And you want to help me. So of course I want to help you. And it doesn't have to be a skill that you're good at. You could simply be like, I have 180 pounds of zucchini on my counter right now. I'm going to go to this club meeting with a basket full of zucchini. And the dude that I'm talking to about beekeeping, I'm going to give him a bunch of flowers and a zucchini and then say, I have a question.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's how you build relationships again, that hold that casserole dish.
Yeah.
And because you're intruding in someone's life by being like, tell me all you know. I'm going to enter your house and eat your food.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not always about paying cash too, right? It's all it's
and
like,
I think that's an offer too. It's like I've offered people, I'm like, I can give you $175 for an hour, but I want to be able to split that hour up into 4 separate calls throughout the year. It'll only be 15-minute calls. So I'm not asking for all your time, but can I give you this $100 to be able to call you 4 times throughout the year as I'm learning? Yeah. And if those calls end up going to being 30 minutes at a time because they want to talk your ear off, that's their choice. But you're showing that you respect their knowledge and their ability to share and willingness to be a part of a club or a group and support each other. And it's really nice to be acknowledged and witnessed for that care and consideration for others. Again, it builds community, right? And that's what the hive mentality is all about. And that's what beekeeping brings the best out of people.
It's awesome the connections between the bee, the hive, and like the community and in our community. Like we're not that different from insects, right? So
oh man, we're more like ants than bees though. We always take without giving back, and we acidify the soil. Like honestly, we farm aphids. Like man, I wish we just were more like bees than ants. I love ants, but bees pollinate one flower and spread thousands of seeds. And that's what I would like to see all of you do in the work that you guys are doing. So thank you guys so much for your inviting me and for doing this wonderful speaker series throughout the year. I look forward to participating as an observer and contributor to the coming speakers this fall.
That's great. And I want to thank you again for joining us and educating us on honeybees in the city.
My pleasure.
I wanted to mention just your website because I was on it there doing the prep work for this, and it's great. So if anyone needs information or anything, check out abcbees.ca, right?
Yeah, I put it in the chat as well.
There you go. Awesome. So yeah, just check it out. I just have a couple of closing remarks before we've gone a little over the time, but that's okay. Next week we're switching topics to Jeanne McWright, president of Blooming Boulevards. I'm sorry if I messed up her name there. I believe Sandora is back though as the host, so she's much more smooth at this than I am. And we'll be working, they'll be discussing working with your municipality and other partners to create programs like Blooming Boulevards. So it should be a super interesting chat, that one too, and please check it out. Until then, again, thank you, Eliese, and thank you everyone for joining us. So take care.